What's up, Red Letter Disciples? Welcome back. It's another great conversation today. Our podcast exists to challenge you to become the greatest disciple of Jesus that you can possibly become. I'll welcome my co-host, Chris Johnson, onto the podcast. He's my pastor friend from Resurrection Church in Sanford, Florida. And today we welcome a really special guest. His name's David Ashcraft. David is the leader, CEO of the Global Leadership Network. That is the largest single gathering of leaders in the world. And prior to that, he led a church called LCBC in Pennsylvania that started with 150 people when he started there, and he grew it over the years. Of course, God, the Holy Spirit, was just all over this church, from one church in one location with 150 people to, listen to this, 22,000 people in 19 locations. Absolutely amazing. And so we're going to hear, what's the secret of church growth? And I got to tell you, I've never heard this answer before, and I think there's some real legs to it. It's going to be awesome to hear about that. Plus, they're one of the only churches, I think, that's doing what I keep telling people and pastors to do: measure your discipleship. So we're going to talk to them about how to measure discipleship, some really awesome stuff. And you're going to hear from me and from David on what the most favorite or memorable talk from the Global Leadership Summit that we've ever heard. And we're going to have a great time today. So thankful today for our sponsor, Red Letter Living. We create resources that challenge people to be great disciples of Jesus. This podcast is one of them, but I've got a brand new, in fact, our newest resource, which is available for pre-sale for only one more week if you're listening with the right time. Today's September 10th, as this is coming out. And so one more week, we got a brand new project called Red Letter Advent that I want to tell you about. It's a 25-day devotional that's perfect, we think, for your church. For December 1 through 25, readers will be invited to unbox the 4 gifts of hope, peace, joy, and love that Jesus so desperately wants for them to not only open, but to give away to others as well. Not only will readers go through this powerful journey, but the whole church, because alongside of the book, you know what we do at Red Letter. If you do, here's what we do. We provide so many free resources that this comes with everything you might need as a church leader for the entire month of December. I'm talking sermons on Sundays. I'm talking small group videos. If you don't do small groups, but do this thing called midweek that a lot of churches do, you can use these videos as your teachings for midweek. We got questions that go with them. We've got kids curriculum. We've got daily family questions to take it further in your homes. We've got graphics for the church. You name it, we've got it. It's going to be an epic month of December. But the only way to guarantee you get this for your church in Advent 2024 is to get in the pre-sale. Retail is one of our most economical products. It's only $20 per book, but the pre-sale has anywhere from 25 to 35% off with a minimum order of 25 books or more. And again, because of the seasonality of this product, we cannot guarantee a church books if they choose not to get in the pre-sale. So you got to get in now and lock your church in for what we believe is going to be a very, very, very powerful month of December with Red Letter Advent. You can find all the details about our newest project at redletteradvent.com. Again, that's redletteradvent.com. And for those listening in live, again, that pre-sale ends a week from today, September 17th. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the Red Letter Disciple podcast or follow it on your favorite platform. We would ask that you would do that. Those download numbers and those subscriptions are helpful for us to know what God is doing with this podcast. Also, if it's doing something personally for you, would you, while you're there, take a minute and rate it and review it? It'd be an honor to see what you think and what God's doing. If this podcast has helped you and you can put 5 stars on it, that would be so cool to see. So without anything further, we got it all out of the way now. So we're going to get on to a really incredible, one of my favorite conversations we've ever had with David Ashcraft on the podcast today. So let's do this. All right, I'm really pumped about today's guest on the Red Letter Disciple. We are bringing David Ashcraft on to the Red Letter Disciple. He is currently serving as the president and CEO of the Global Leadership Network, which I know has made a huge difference in my life and has made difference in, well, he'll be able to tell us how many lives, maybe, I would think millions of people's lives over the years. Every year, of course, their signature event, the Global Leadership Summit, an annual gathering that brings ministry and marketplace expertise together from over 120 countries, wow, translated into 60 languages, which is just a crazy beast to think about.
60 languages.
Yeah, crazy. All in a couple days. It's wild. prior to Global Leadership Network and his work there, he spent 32 years serving as the pastor of LCBC Church, which stands for Lives Changed by Christ. And under David's leadership, they went from one location of 150 attendees to 19 locations across the state of Pennsylvania and a weekly attendance of over 22,000. So he knows a little bit about church growth.
That's not nothing. You know what I mean?
That's pretty fabulous. So
it's pretty big.
We are thrilled to have you, David. Welcome to the Red Letter Disciple. Thanks so much for being a part of our podcast today. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Zach. Thank you very much, Chris. Good to have to be with you guys. I've been actually learning different languages and honing up on my 60 languages for translation there.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you're the one that personally translates all 60 languages.
All 60. So it's a tough time. Yeah.
A Herculean task.
Okay, since you went there, what's your is there like a one-liner or something that you're having to learn in different languages?
You know what? With AI now, to be honest with you, Zach, we can take the two of you, and your lips, everything moves, and you can speak in any language that we want you to.
It's funny that you say that because I'm not actually here right now.
It's an animated artificial friend of mine that
he saved some money and he just went AI.
It was cheaper and more effective, actually.
Wow. Ouch.
That's really awesome. So you led a church, LCBC. Was it always named Lives Changed by Christ, or is that an acronym for it, or what?
So when I first went to LCBC, it was about 3 years old. So I came in 1991, and it was originally Lancaster County Bible Church, but everybody just shortened it to LCBC.
Nice.
And then when we started having campuses outside of Lancaster, we said, well, it can't be Lancaster County Bible Church anymore. And we always just kind of use the acronym Lives Changed by Christ. So we said, let's just make that the name. So we'll just describe ourselves. We'll just say that's who we are. We're a group of people whose lives have been and continue to be changed by Jesus Christ. So it
also kind of sounds like a Division II college football team, LCBC. Like we gotta take on LCBC.
I like it. Let's take what we've already got. So what's funny is in our denomination that we're part of, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, LCMS, there's 33 geographical districts. And I know you got to talk to a lot of our lead pastors at some of the larger churches this year at the Large Church Network, which is where I got to meet you. But there's 33 geographical, and then there's 2 non-geographical districts. In our church, when I was in Florida, we were a part of one of those called the SELC.
Yeah.
And it used to be titled that for the Slovakian Evangelical Lutheran Church.
Turns out none of us are Slovakian anymore.
Yeah, so. But they decided they liked the acronym that they just kept it, but now it means nothing. It's just SELC.
It means they changed it to showing everyone love in Christ.
Exactly. So it's like, we're just going to keep the 4 letters because it's too much. We have too much branding into this to change it. All right. So that's a pretty impressive numbers that I just read, that under your 32 years of leadership, which, praise God, by the way, 32 years in one place. That's rare these days.
Right.
But grew to a combined weekly attendance of 22,000 across 19 locations. So I'm sure there's one secret to all that church growth. What is it? I want to title this episode "How to Grow to Your Church to 22,000 by Doing This One Thing."
Right. So get it.
Yeah,
that will be easy to give, no problem. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. They're different phases. Everything from I'll back all the way up to 150 people. 3 months into my time at LCBC, we had 4 elders at the time. I took them to Philadelphia. We went to, back then it was a John Maxwell conference of how to break the 200 barrier. And we just said, how do we get past 200? And very quickly we learned that if we will just go to school on churches double our size, figure out what they're doing differently than we are, then we'd start doing that. And we'd just say, let's acting like a church of 400, even though we're not. If God chooses to bring us 400 people, that's great. And we did that with 400, 800, and we still even do that today, where we're trying to find churches or organizations that are twice our size and saying, okay, what does it look like to be that? And then let's start acting like it. And some people could say, well, you're being real presumptuous that God's going to take you there. And we said, it's not about presuming. It's just I'd be really sad if God wanted us to have 40,000 people or 50,000 or 400, whatever the number may be, and we didn't plan for it. It's just because of our poor planning that we didn't grow. And I think oftentimes churches really do stop growing because of a lot of systematic structural issues. It's not a spiritual issue all the time. So
yeah. That's really cool. I love that idea. And I imagine you have, at 22,000, you have less churches you can look at.
Yeah.
But I think that's really fascinating to, hey, whatever pastor your attendance is right now, double that and find a couple of those or a few of those fast growing that are about that size. And what are they doing? That's really cool. What was there a particular plateau? I'm wondering that was like the most difficult for you guys to break? And what would that have been for you?
One of the things I learned years ago from a guy named Carl George, he'd likened churches to animals, and he had a chart that he would put up on the wall. And he started with a mouse, and then it was a cat, and then it was a small dog, and then what he called a lap dog, large dog, and then he went to a cow and a horse and so forth. And last was a dinosaur. And he would just say that all of those things that he just put on his chart, they're all animals, but they're very different animals. And a cat is very different than a dog and very different than a mouse. Then he'd kind of put churches up on a board and say, so these are all churches, and he'd list different sizes, and he'd have 35 people, 200 people, all the way down to 10,000 people. He said they're all churches, but they are very different animals. And so what we had discovered is every time we would hit a certain point where there'd be tension on the staff, there'd be frustration because things weren't working quite as well, we realized we were moving typically from one size animal to another. And the danger or the problem that most churches and most pastors will do is you'll be at a church of, and so in his chart, a cat would be a church of 75 people. You've grown to almost 200 people. You've actually become a dog at that point. You're a different animal, but you keep acting like a cat. And so unless you go ahead and transition or evolve into that dog, you'll never grow past 200 because you're kind of stuck in that cat mentality. Or even as we got bigger, when we were 10, 12,000, we went through another one of these changes. And it just felt like we had this balloon we kept blowing up and thinking, okay, if we just blow it up a little bit more, we can grow more. And at some point, it's either going to burst and be real ugly, or you have to get a new balloon and start over. And so, I don't know that I would pick one time, Chris, that was harder, or Zach, that was harder than the other. But every time you just started feeling the tension, communication was going wrong. People were frustrated with each other. Things weren't working as smoothly. And oftentimes, you can spiritualize that and say, well, man, it's you must not be walking with the Lord or whatever it is. And it had nothing to do with that. It's just the structure was causing all this tension for us.
Yeah, I keep hearing you talk about that structure piece, and sometimes not spiritual, but structure. So when you were looking at churches double your size, were you mainly looking at the structure side of how they operated?
Yeah, very much so. And what's hard is, and I appreciate earlier you said, look at growing churches, because churches can kind of hit a plateau and they can settle, and then they'll have a structure, but that's not structured for growth. That's structured to maintain. If you're wanting to grow, you need to be looking at churches that are growing and seeing how are they going to grow, or how are they going to structure themselves. And so oftentimes it was staffing. Oftentimes it was how's their leadership kind of structure? Is it the pastor and an associate pastor, or is it an executive team, or all of those kind of things? So it really is more that type of thing. Who are the pastors? What are the positions that they hired first that we probably ought to look at, and making sure that we're always hiring for growth. And again, you have to watch, because people go, well, wait a minute, you're starting to sound like a business. And I would say we are all businesses, whether we want to admit it or not. I know we're the body of Christ and all, but we still, if we want to be able to grow to a different animal, we've got to look at the business side of it and say there are some structural things. And so I would look at staff and say, is this person going to bring more people into the church, or is it just going to cost us money and make it easier for me? And I think a lot of times as pastors, especially that pastor going from 75 to 200, then he starts looking for an associate pastor to hire to take all the stuff that he doesn't want to do anymore, make it easier for him. And so he's lightened his load, but he's done nothing to cause the church to grow. And so for me, I kept doing things that I didn't necessarily enjoy doing until we were 4,000 people, because I wanted to hire people that were going to cause growth, not take a load off of me.
Wow, that is, and it's cool. Really good insight. So for the last 20 years, I was at a church that was at about 400 or 500 people on a weekend, and then the founding pastor passed away, and then a new pastor came in, and one thing that I noticed about him was that he would hire people that would make his job easier, and I noticed that right away, and we started shrinking down to the point where we got to probably about 150, 200 people. And he's no longer there now, but I had about 15 months ago, I took a call to go plant a church with a bunch of young folks. And the thing that I've noticed right now, we 15 months in, and we are pretty much locked in at like 100 people, like every week, 100 people. And there'll be new people coming in, and we're trying to maintain. But I think that's a really good idea to go check out maybe a church that's getting 200 or 300 people, see what they're doing differently. I love that idea. I didn't really even hit me.
And Chris, I would, if I were talking to you, I would, well, I am talking to you.
Yeah.
If I were advising you,
Yeah.
I would say, first of all, you're acting like a cat and you need to start acting like a dog. And so go find some dogs and see how dogs operate differently than you, and then start acting like a dog. And if God chooses to grow you to a dog size, that's great. If not, nothing's been hurt at all, but at least you've made it possible for you to get there. Otherwise, you're stuck as a cat and you'll always be a cat.
And so if I'm hearing you correctly, leave the litter box, go outside. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good, there you go. I like that.
All right.
No.
And I think that's true, not just in church, but in business world too. It's like how
litter
much,
box thing? Or?
No, the wanting the staff to fill in what might make your life easier, but it might not necessarily make growth for your, I think that's really fascinating. So
yes,
that's really
exactly. So an example of that real quick would be, we grew to 3,000 people before we hired our first full-time KidMin person.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And we had a number of individuals, moms in the church that were great at administration, great at leadership, and they wanted part-time jobs. They didn't want full-time jobs. And so we said, okay, we could spend a ton of money on a full-time person, or we can cap ourselves, or let's go ahead and utilize these that are interested in the part-time jobs. So we went to 3,000 people before hiring that full-time position. When it started being painful, when you start getting that 2,000 to 3,000 range, you start having to hire accountants or HR people, and it would kill me every time. It's more the operational people. And I just go, and I'd tell them, I'd say, this is painful to hire you, and I know we need you, but you're not going to bring anybody new into the church. And so it's really hard. Yeah. But you just have to focus on that and keep thinking, okay, is it about me or is it about growing the church? So
yeah, that's good.
Really good.
So as you continue to grow into these just, astronomical numbers in many respects for a church, like I would love to know like the different pain points when it comes to producing disciples, the larger the church gets.
Well, I think part of growing large is you have to be a systems builder. And so, early days, like care ministry, in a small church, the pastor does everything. He goes to the hospital, visits everybody. I don't and never did enjoy that kind of thing. And so right away, partly out of wanting to grow, but partly because I didn't enjoy that, I started recruiting volunteers in the church that were great at that. And they were great at caring. They had that gift. And so we began to, and we've got a system now, even at 22, the church is now 24,000 people. We've got systems that are better. You'll be better taken care of at LCBC than even a small church of 75. It won't be me. It won't be the pastor that's going to come visit you, but I guarantee you're going to get noticed. You're going to get cared for. You're going to get phone calls. You're going to get hospital visits. So you have to create systems all the time. So whether that's for caring for people, whether it's discipleship, you always just have to have a system in place that's going to help you manage, and scale really is what you're talking about. I would say, though, Zach, the hardest piece to do that on is discipleship, because
interesting, yeah.
It's still very individual in how we grow. None of us start at the same place. None of us grow and learn the same way. And so there's an individual side of discipleship that makes it more challenging. You can't just cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how did you, or did you measure what effective discipleship looked like at LCBC?
Yeah, we definitely did and still do and wrestle with it all the time. I'll go back and give you a story. Before I went to LCBC, I was at a church in Dallas, Texas. Schofield Memorial Church was the name of the church. And church of about 2,500 people. There were about, I would say, 16 professors from Dallas Seminary that taught Sunday school classes in that church. So, I mean, they were about as well taught as you can get.
Yeah, crazy.
And my first job out of seminary was supposedly to be the leader of these profs, and I just kind of let them go and do their thing. Yeah. But there was a leadership transition in the church, and when that happened, the church just kind of blew up. And what it taught me, and the people acted more immature than what I've ever seen. And what it taught me is, just because you have lots of Bible knowledge, and just because you've been taught by 16 Dallas Seminary professors that are at the top of the game, does not mean you're a discipled person, does not mean you're a mature Christian. And so it caused me then to very much to wrestle with, so how do you truly disciple people? Back then as well, Navigators had a program they called, and I'm going to drop blanks on it now, but it was like, it was a Timothy kind of, anyway, they had a discipleship program that had like 21 weeks, and you went through their material, and after 21 weeks, you were discipled. And we know that what you did is you completed a class.
Yeah.
And so until it actually becomes real. And so we took more of the approach of let's teach people as they're actually walking, as opposed to a classroom model. Let's bring them in and teach them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, when I went to college and seminary, I spent 4 years in college at Texas Tech University studying business. And so you study what might be what you think you're going to need, as opposed to what's actually going on in the business world. And once you get out in the business world, all of a sudden you go, oh man, okay, I wish I'd have listened closer back then. And so we try to say, get involved in the church, start serving somewhere. As you're serving, you're going to come up with all kinds of questions. Let's answer those questions as they're coming up, as opposed to having this big pool of reserves of questions you may never ever face at all.
That's good. Yeah. And I think too, that's obviously such the important part of why church leaders and pastors that are listening obviously would know this, why church is so important, is because it does offer that, not just the education and the information, which is important, the consuming of God's word, but it offers the opportunities to contribute through serving, through generosity, through, understanding your story and testimony and sharing that, which is all effective marks of disciple, which is just so cool. So,
Exactly. Yeah. So you asked me, what did we measure? What did we measure? Yeah. And so we actually have come up with an engagement program where we've got an engagement score for all of our campus pastors and everybody on their campus. And we measure church attendance, first of all. And what's funny is every conference you go to, they'll kind of make fun of, oh, it's not about church attendance. It's not about giving. Bottom line, it is. And so they are still important. Yeah. And so attendance, though that's changed. Before COVID, the number you always hear was about 1.8 times a month. The average person would come to church. Now the kind of numbers that we hear, one every 6 weeks is kind of the average. So I think for us, we measure 4 out of 8 weeks. If you're there 4 times out of 8 weeks, you get an engagement score of 1 just for attendance. If you're giving financially, and so we base it off of if you give 4 times a year or $2,500 over the course of the year, you could give it 1 time, but $2,500 or 4 times a year, then we'd say you're engaged in the giving. We look at small group involvement, and so if you're involved in a small group, and I think we say if you show up 6 times every 6 months, then you get another point for that. And then the other is serving. And if you're serving and you serve X number of times a year, then we'd say you're engaged in that way. So those are the 4 points. We tried to add a 5th one of outreach, but we're not sure how to measure that. And so we kind of landed on those 4. And if you look at your whole church, it's actually depressing on how many people hit all 4. So you kind of have to get over that shock and then say, okay, now let's kind of say, but the goal isn't to say we've got all these discipled people. The goal is to say, how do we help people take the next step? Yeah. And so you got to figure out where they are now before you can help take the next step.
So you have 24,000 people. How on earth do you keep track of all that?
So one of the things that we do that I don't know that any other church our size does, and we did it since we were 150 people, we take attendance every week. I mean, literal attendance where we ask people to check in. And so every week they check in and we know they're there every week. And
how do they check in? How do they check in?
Well, it used to be, you tear off something on the program. Now we've got apps, and you do it on the apps, or you can do it through text or a number of different ways. And so we have about every weekend, as we count bodies in the buildings, we know that we have about 75 to 80% of the people that actually check in on the app every week. So we've got a lot of information about everybody.
So I could theoretically be on my way to church, maybe stop at Chick-fil-A, check in. I could lie.
You could.
Everybody would know you didn't go to Chick-fil-A because it's closed on Sunday.
Well, maybe I'm going to Saturday service.
Exactly.
Well, okay. You think this guy only has church on Sunday?
So here's what I love that's unique that I don't hear much in the discipleship space. It's what you're doing that's really unique is you're measuring individuals and assigning them a number or a score. And I've been a huge proponent of we have to measure discipleship. And I'm all for measuring church growth metrics, which are some of the same things, by the way, that you're measuring for individuals. It's good to measure church growth metrics, attendance, baptisms, how many in small groups, all that stuff's good. And that will tell you if the church is doing what the church ought to do.
Right.
But then we also, on the other side, which is not many churches are doing, which I'm trying to teach more and more, you can measure things. And just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean it doesn't do anything. Right. But I love that you're doing that and assigning an individual score or number to a person. My question for you then would be, do the people, I guess,
know their score?
Know that they're being measured or scored, or do you use that as an opportunity?
Yeah.
No, we don't tell them their score. So if Chris were coming,
Right,
we'd get a half a point for lying to us and saying he's coming. No, we would not measure that.
so when they come in, you don't say, hey, there's Chuck, he's a big old one.
Yeah, exactly. No, we don't do that. So, but the way we use it is with our staff and with our campus pastors. So every campus pastor knows exactly what the scores are aggregated on his campus. And so they can decide each year as we go through there, we call it an action development plan. And so for the year, they can decide, or we can even say, you know what, your campus is the lowest when it comes to giving, or it's the lowest in serving, or it's the lowest in attendance. Yeah. And so you pick one area. We would suggest you do it, say, in serving. And what do you need to do on your campus? And we help them figure out what they need to do on their campus to get more people serving at their location. And so they can focus on that for the year. And it's fascinating to watch that campus go up. And again, it's not astronomical, but it's the averages go up and makes a difference. And so it's more for us to use than the individual.
So I have a question for you. Sometimes people differentiate service, right? And I see some churches, they really push, hey, volunteer at church, and that's service. And then, you've got a second type of service where you're out in the community, you're doing mission work, that kind of thing. Like, what do you classify as service?
In our 4 areas, it would be serving in the church. Okay. And we talk in other environments of serving out in the community, and we've got big pushes to do that. That's part of even our outreach. And so that 5th one that we're still trying to figure out how to measure is that, but we're inside the church. And some of that is just pragmatic because we need people serving.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and also it's easier to measure serving in the church because you've got people coming, doing that.
Certainly harder to lie about.
And the challenge
want to lie today.
Yeah. The challenge with that is, and I've been through the Global Leadership Network working with a lot of leaders that are real high capacity. Maybe they've got a lot of finances. I was talking to a gentleman that has 5 car dealerships in Minnesota, and he was telling me, I was just saying, how do you serve in your church? How does the church utilize your gifts? And he said, I'm asked to come in and pass out programs, or I'm asked to, and he said, I'll never do it. I'm not going to work in the nursery, but they'll ask me to do those kind of things. And as we were talking, he said, it'd be just like me coming into his car dealership. And so what we'll oftentimes in the church, our thinking will be, well, he's a businessman. He's probably tired of business. So let's give him a non-thinking job. Let's put him with bulletins or kids or things like that. Yeah. He said that'd be the equivalent of me coming into his car dealership and saying, David, I know you're a leader, but rather than lead, would you go work on that transmission and understand and learn how to work on transmissions, which I know nothing about. Yeah. He said it's that foreign to him to be thrown into some of the jobs that he's given at church. So that's a struggle that a lot of churches have.
So how do you combat that then? Like, how do you combat, do you have some kind of system or program to what is it, a gifts assessment or something?
So we've gone back and forth on gifts assessments. We did that early on a lot, and we just started doing it again more recently. We stopped for a long time because all of a sudden then, gifts assessments are great because they show you where maybe God is leaning towards your gift, but it's also an excuse not to do things that aren't your gifting. And so we got tired of people going, yeah, well, I'm gifted in this, and so therefore I can't do that. And it's like, yeah, that's not the way it works so much. So we kind of quit focusing on that. With somebody like, this guy's name was Rob, and he said, for his situation, he said, unfortunately, he said, every pastor I've ever been around, they always settle for my money when they could have had all of me, or they could have had my mind. And it's easy for him to give finances. He would prefer to give his finances, but he'd also love to come in and help figure out, how do you go from 100 people to 200 people? You've got people sitting in the church that know that kind of stuff if you just take the time to talk to them. And so I would always, with those high capacity leaders, they typically don't want to be on the board. They typically aren't going to show up and work every week for you, but I would put them on different teams. We're a team, we're studying multi-site. How do we scale? And so they'd love being on teams to help you figure things like that out. So.
I have never met anybody spiritually gifted in parking. So I don't know what to say.
There you go. All right. So 32 years at LCBC. Was it like, were you then retired and then took a new job, or what? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So probably about 12 years ago, had opportunity to sit in a small group of maybe 15 people with Jim Collins. And Jim Collins wrote the Good to Great
Yeah,
book and a bunch of other
fabulous.
things. And in that session, he was just going around the table. He was talking with us about his 5 levels of leadership. And his level 5 is the highest level. And so, again, I'm sure all of us, at least I was in the room, sitting there going, okay, am I a level 5? I definitely must be a level 5 leader. And he says, you're never a level 5 leader until you've actually left your organization. And your organization is better with you gone than with you there.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of jolted me because, I mean, selfishly in my mind, I thought when I walk away from LCBC, everybody's going to cry, they're going to struggle and think, how can we live without David? And before I even was able to think about that much, he said, and if your church falls apart or your organization falls apart when you leave, you're a terrible leader and you didn't do a good job. So that started me on this 10-year, 12-year journey. Yeah. Started me on this journey to say, what do I need to do to make sure LCBC is better when I'm gone than when I'm there? And a big piece of it is focusing on the church more than my needs. I think oftentimes when we're starting to think about a transition, we're thinking about it, when is it best for me? When are my kids going to graduate from high school or college or things like that? And I've always watched that and thought, well, man, when did God make the indicator the right time to transition away from your church is when your kids graduate from high school or college. And so really focused on what's best for the church. And so we put together a small succession team. And for about 10 years, we'd meet twice a year. And we had a plan mapped out where it wasn't when it was best for me to step away, but when it was ready for the church. And so there were some financial things we had to take care of to make sure that we were in a good situation. We had structural changes we needed to make. And so we restructured the staff. My successor, we had to figure out who that was going to be. We decided to go internally. The candidate that I brought to that team 10 years ago, they were like, there's no way that this person can be that. So I said, well, why not? What are his shortcomings? What are things we need to work on? And so they listed 4 or 5. We went to work on those 4 or 5 things. So 6 years later, when I brought him back again, they said, yep, we totally think he's the guy. Had I waited till 2 years before I was going to step away, there would have never been time to get him ready. And there would have never been time to do all the things we needed to get the church ready. So I stepped away about not quite 2 years ago, not because I was ready to retire, but the church was ready. Jason, who took over my role, was ready. The church was ready. The finances were strong. And so it just was right. And so I stepped out, not knowing everything that I was going to do. Part of we knew I was going to work with pastors in Pennsylvania, and I still do that and enjoy that. About 3 months into my time away, Ruth, my wife, came to me and she just said, look, you need to find something else to lead. And then she looked at me and she said, it's not me. And apparently I had been trying to lead her around the house more than she wanted to be led.
Nice. He was developing all these systems around the house.
Exactly.
Get out of here, man.
So she was just kind of saying, we're both better off when you're real busy and not trying to get into her hair. So about that same time, the opportunity of the Global Leadership Network came open. I'd been a part of it for years, and I've been on the board for about 6 years. And so it just was a real good fit for me.
That's amazing and different, right? I mean, it's leading a church is different than leading a group that organizes and assembles and really motivates and trains leaders. And I know that there was several years of disruption with the Global Leadership Network, and so part of it's even restoring and a brand name and an identity that's been so important and crucial. So how's that? What are the main differences, I suppose, leading a large church, very large church, to then leading this just massive organization that's helping so many people?
Well, and then besides that, like, I can't even imagine like how many direct contacts you must have had. And just the daily, well, Zach led a pretty big church in Florida, and I watched him, and the amount of contacts and meetings that he had to have, that it seemed very hard. So I don't even know. It was nowhere near 24,000.
No.
So I'm just curious about your daily life too.
Well, so I will say the bigger the organization gets, the less you get to do as the leader. And I think sometimes people have this notion that the leader in a big organization gets to do anything he wants and everything that he wants. And at LCBC, I'll give you the example of when we started growing and having multiple campuses. For the longest time, I continued to be the kind of campus pastor for our first location in our broadcast location, and it grew to about 8,000 people. And after we got to 6 or 7, 8 campuses, I started hearing the other campus pastors talk about special things they were doing at their campuses. And I realized I wasn't doing that at mine because I didn't have the time to. And so at some point I realized I'm shortchanging the people on my campus. And so we put in a campus pastor there. But all of a sudden, because of that, I didn't get to be the one. Like, I love baptizing people, and we typically will have 600-700 people baptized every year. And I needed to let the campus pastor all of a sudden do the baptisms, and just lots of little things like that I used to love doing as the pastor, but all of a sudden you don't. Or when there would be somebody that, any kind of scenario, all of a sudden, well, you don't really need to talk to me. You need to talk to, the campus pastor. So it's just different. It's challenging. So you actually do less. And so, Chris, to your point, I think, at least in my case, I had meetings. Typically Monday and Tuesday were heavy meeting days for me. But they were with primarily the executive team, the 10 or 12 that I work most closely with. I'd meet with the weekend development team every week. But outside of those two teams, those were the teams and the board that I met with. And so my circle actually got a lot smaller. And when the church was small, everybody in the church would invite us over. As the church got big, everybody just assumed you're busy all the time. So they quit inviting you except for your closest friends. And on one hand, you go, well, wait a minute, why does nobody invite us anymore? But, they just assume you're busy. So in some ways, you're still real busy. It's just different.
Gotcha.
Yeah. What's different with the GLN, one of the most glaring things for me, we do things all year long, but we've got a summit, what we call the Global Leadership Summit, and there's about 300,000 people that participate in that. It's a 2-day event, but it's just once a year. And so, when I was a pastor, people would say, oh, well, you only work 1 day a week, or in our case, Saturday and Sunday, you only work 2 days a week. What do you do the other 5 days of the week? Well, now that I'm leading the GLS, people go, well, you only have a 2-day-a-year event. What do you do the rest of the year? And in church work, every weekend you could make up or you could fix anything that needed to be corrected from the weekend before. And so you had lots of opportunity to make adjustments. Here, we've got one shot each year. And so I've been here 13 months and I'm about to do my second summit. And so there's not a whole lot of room for mistake in there. So
that's really amazing. Yeah. Okay. So your current role and also your pastor role, I'd love to. I've got this narrative going through my head that I obviously believe discipleship and leadership are both very crucial. But I'm wondering, does the church place too much or too little emphasis on either discipleship or leadership? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it almost goes back to what we said earlier, Zach, where I just think we put labels on discipleship. And so, again, as I was growing up, there were the courses that you took. And if you took those courses, you were discipled. It was content driven. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that Jesus, they were his disciples, but they were also the leaders of the early church. So was he teaching them leadership principles or was he teaching them discipleship principles? Yes, he was teaching them both. And so I don't know that you can differentiate. And you might, if the three of us were to get together and we began to focus on what each of us need, maybe you need more focus on content, but maybe Chris, maybe it's more wardrobe help that he needs or things like that. So all of us have different needs. Yeah. That's all still discipleship. And so I don't know that you separate the two. I think we tend to in the church. I don't think we should.
Cool. That's good because part of me wrestles, like the inner narrative I'm kind of playing through in my head is like what I know God has called the church to do is to produce disciples. Mm-hmm. And yet I feel like sometimes what churches try to lean into doing is teach leadership. And like I said, they're both important. I agree with you that you can't maybe separate them, but I'm struggling a little bit with that inner narrative right now of like, I know we're called to produce disciples, and it doesn't feel like collectively the whole church is doing a great job of that if you're looking at numbers.
Yeah.
I see more churches teach leadership, I suppose, than I would say discipleship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if all you're doing is teaching leadership, then you're not going to have a well-rounded disciple. Just like if all I do is teach financial giving and make you think that the only way that you're a fully devoted follower of Christ is by giving financially, then again, you're not well-rounded. So I've got to teach people the fruit of the Spirit. I've got to teach people how to lead. I've got to teach people how to deal with their finances well. And so it's not just one piece. And I understand what you're saying as far as sometimes churches focusing on leadership. I think that's, though, the minority, not the norm. I was actually talking to a leader of a national organization just last week. He was telling me his story where when he went to seminary, he was studying to be a pastor. And he received, before he went to school, he received a full ride scholarship to a well-known, I could say the name, but I won't, seminary. And this was only 15 years ago. And he said that before he started his program, he said, I'm excited about this, and I'm grateful for the scholarship. I'd like to add an extra semester. I'll pay for it, and I'd like to just focus on leadership for that semester so I'll be able to lead my church well. They responded back to him and said, doesn't sound like you want to be a pastor because pastors don't need leadership. He said, no, I really do want leadership. So he went back to him again and said, I really feel like God's calling me to be a pastor, but I just want to learn to lead. And ultimately they rescinded his scholarship offer and said, it's obvious that you are not meant to be a pastor because you're so focused on leadership. And that's 15 years ago, major seminary that I could tell you the name, you'd know it, that's putting out lots of people to lead churches, but they're not teaching them how to lead. So I think there is a gap there still in church world and what we think, because what you're saying, that we think a disciple is different than a leader. And I think they're the same things.
Well, even when we went to seminary, like we went to the same seminary in St. Louis, I mean, they don't talk a lot about that,
No.
like it's not, they don't talk a lot about the business side of it. They don't talk a lot about, they're basically, okay, go, preach the gospel, administer the sacraments, baptize people.
Yeah.
And then they drill you with Old and New Testament. But
right. You learn the systematic theology.
Correct.
The obviously more confidence in getting the Bible. And that's where like things like Global Leadership Summit, I know it's there are a lot of faith-based and a lot of pastors that attend it, but also business and nonprofit. But that's where things like that really do fill in the gap to provide, I think, a lot of what our friend Rich Birchie has a ministry called Unseminary, like teaching you all the things seminary. There's a lot of stuff seminary doesn't teach you, and leadership is one of those. And so that's where something like the summit is just so valuable. David, when you were with some Lutheran pastors earlier this year, like I said, at the Large Church Network, and I remember as you were sharing an illustration about kids soccer, I wrote in my notes, David sharing a powerful story about kids soccer. If you ever have on the podcast, ask him about it. So I'm asking you about it. What can kids soccer teach us today about leadership and all of the stuff we're talking about?
So if I were to sit down and talk about leadership with you guys in any organization, whether it's a church or not, I'd say the number one thing you've got to figure out is what business are you in? What is it you're trying to accomplish as an organization? And again, that sounds like a business term. What business are you in? But what are you trying to do? And are you trying to win people to Jesus? Are you trying to grow disciples? Are you trying to just keep the base happy in your organization? What is it you're truly trying to do? And I think most churches don't know what business they're in. They haven't taken the time to figure it out. And so the illustration of the soccer is when my kids were young, and 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. And right now my grandkids are coming back into that or growing into that phase. So I'm going to go through it again, but they were on soccer teams. I've got a son, a daughter. And when you go to kids soccer games, especially that age, what you see is a mob of kids running around the field. And all they know is that they're supposed to chase the ball and kick it. And so you've got, I don't know how many kids on the field, 10 running up and down, chasing around, trying to kick this ball, never scoring goals because they don't understand that the whole point is to get it through the net. Now, what'll sometimes happen is you'll have a kid that's got an older brother or sister that's taught them to get it through the goal. So they'll score some goals, but most of them are just doing this. And my observation of most churches is we're doing this. And I'll listen to pastors talk about how busy they are and how busy their people in their church are. I'll talk to people in church. They'll say how busy they are and they're worn out because they're doing this, but they've never stopped to say, are we scoring any goals? And they're huffing and puffing and they're tired, but they're not scoring any goals because they've never asked the question, what business are we in? And so for us as a church, we just said our business is introducing more people to Jesus and then together fully following him. And if we weren't introducing people to Jesus and if we weren't growing them up in their faith, then we weren't doing what we said we were doing. And so that helped us say no to a lot of things where we'd go, that's good. It's not best for us. And so one of our principles is what's good, what's best. We're only going to do what's best. So.
That's really good too, because I think, So how would you then coach a pastor or a leader of an organization then to find out what business they're in? Like what's that process like?
For us, I can still remember going on a retreat when we were 150 people and we went to Ocean City, New Jersey, and we sat with all the elders for 3 days and we just tried to figure out, okay, what is it that God's asking us to do? And we landed on introduce more people to Jesus and grow them up in their faith. And anything that doesn't help us accomplish those things, we're just going to say no to. And so that became our driving force. And so part of my job as a pastor, and even more so the last 10 years of being at LCBC, was saying no to all kinds of good things, because everybody in the church has a good thing they want you to do. I've got this good cause. We ought to become the foster church. And if everybody in the church would be a foster parent, we could wipe out, homelessness for kids, or everybody's got their cause. And so we would say, you know what, that's good. That's a good cause. And for you, that's wonderful. But God has called us to this. And so we're going to say no to those things. And a lot of people get mad at you because we don't jump on their cause, but you have to kind of stick to your guns that way. So.
Yeah, it's good. One of the things too that you talked about that I really resonated with, and I know you said earlier that you help lead pastors in Pennsylvania still through, I think it's through a ministry called The Advantage.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about that word advantage. And I think that's a really important word for not just church leaders and pastors, but for everyday disciples as well. So talk to me a little bit about what the advantage means to you and how that can be a really effective tool for a disciple.
So probably 4 or 5 years ago, I was reading through the book of Acts. And as a church, one of the things that we challenge people to do is find your chair every day, take time to read scripture. Well, for me, that stage of my life and still today, I don't sleep near as late as I want. And so I'll lay in bed and I'll pull out my phone and I'll start reading scripture and news and things like that. So I'm laying in bed and I'm reading through the book of Acts, and I come across a passage that describes a guy named Apollos. And Apollos, it describes him as being this eloquent speaker and gifted debater and all these different things. And as I'm reading through it again, I'm saying, okay, am I anything like Apollos? And I decided I'm nothing like Apollos. And so I'm getting discouraged as I'm reading all these different qualities of him. And then all of a sudden I came across just one little description that I'm sure I've read before, but it never caught my eye. And it just said that Apollos was a great benefit or advantage to every believer that he came in contact with. And I decided, okay, I can be that. And I'd love to be that. I'd love to be an advantage. And for me, I narrowed it to pastors. I would love to be an advantage to pastors, every pastor I come in contact with. And so that's where the idea of the advantage came from. Ultimately, we started an organization in Pennsylvania. There's 4 of us, and we call it the Advantage. We were going to initially reach out to every church in Pennsylvania. We found out there were about 21,000 churches in Pennsylvania. We said, okay, let's narrow that down. And so then we said, let's focus on the largest churches. And so I personally reached out to 80 pastors of the 80 largest churches in Pennsylvania, invited them to come meet with us one day just to say, what would it look like for all of us to lock arms and just be better at what we're doing? Not to say let's do crusades together, or let's do concerts of prayer, but really if we can all help each other be better at what we're doing, then more people will be introduced to Jesus. And so we had 74 out of the 80 come to that one day event. And then we said to those 74, what if we were to join together in cohorts, meet twice a year, share best practices, and then if each of you would in turn find 10 other pastors that you're going to mentor, then all of a sudden our 64 goes to 640 or 650 if it's 65. And so right now we're in that stage of them going to their 10. And so by September, I ought to be able to, by this fall, I ought to be able to say, you know what, we've got 650 pastors that we are working with in Pennsylvania. And then we feel like we can move the dial as far as more people coming to know Jesus in Pennsylvania.
That's amazing. And I think, we hear a lot in these days too, of, to be successful in the world, like just add value to people, add value. And so I see a similar, with the word advantage there. And I think of disciples, if we can always have that mindset of everywhere we go and everyone that we talk with, like, how can we be a benefit to them and how can we add value to their lives? It's just such a much richer, fresh, way to live. And so I think
Zach, for me, the biggest compliment I could get is to sit down with a pastor or a group of pastors, but it can just be one. And when they leave, they say, you know what, I feel like somehow you've been such an advantage to me. That hour, that 30 minutes, however much time we spent together, was really an advantage for me to be with you. And then I go, okay, I'm fulfilled. That's what God's called me to be right now.
Because that does bring fulfillment to you too. That's what's really awesome about like serving God is it's not only a win for the other person, but it actually gives what so many people are longing for, is that joy and fulfillment. And that most comes when we serve others and think of others and put their dreams and help them. And by the way, you are being an advantage to many people through this conversation that hear this on the other side. So you're living up to that today for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to tell you my favorite global leadership talk of all time. And I'm going to put you in the hot seat. I know you're the GLN guy, and I'm going to ask you yours. And I don't know if, you're going to anger some people that have been on stage or not there. But anyway, here's mine. I remember I was my dad's a pastor too. And so he would take me, even when I was a teenager. I went to my first global leadership summit. So I bet I was 16 or 17. And I'll forever remember the talk. It was Erwin McManus.
Yeah.
And I think he had just written his book or was going to write a book around the barbarian way. Mm-hmm. And I remember what he talked about. It was John the Baptist, who did all these things right for the Lord and yet was in trouble. And he sent the question back to Jesus, "Are you the Messiah?"
Right.
And anyway, it was a really powerful message, and in that was the visual as well that he gave that I'll forever remember was of the rhinoceros. That a group of rhinos is called a, crash.
Oh yeah,
and they can run 30 mile an hour, but they can only see 30 feet ahead. And John the Baptist had this mindset, and that's the mindset that we need to have as Christians of like, we're going to run full steam ahead, knowing that Jesus is the Messiah, even if we can't see that far down the road. And gosh, that was maybe a life-changing message for me, because that was one of the days where, in those faith formative years where I was really thinking about is being a pastor and leading the right thing. And so that was super powerful. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat. You got one that maybe it's not your favorite, but the one you're remembering right now?
Well, a couple of things I'll just say about that story in particular, Zach. I was there for that talk as well. I could tell you where I was sitting when he gave a talk. It was powerful. Part of what I remember, and I told him this, I was with him just a month or so ago, and I said, what I remember about that talk is that he was a fill-in at the last minute. Somebody got sick. He was called in to fill in. And he said, I think as he started, he said, I was laying on the bathroom floor this morning, just kind of sick and thinking about this. And it was powerful. And that whole example of the rhino, we used that at LCBC one year for a campaign we were doing. And so we gave everybody little rhinos. And so now I've got rhinos. I'm in Chicago now, but if I were back in Pennsylvania, I've got rhinos everywhere because everybody now when they travel and gets a rhino, they give it to me. And so I've got rhinos everywhere, but that was very powerful.
Very cool. I remember. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember exactly where I was sitting too, and just the powerful moment. And now that you mentioned that he was a fill-in, that comes back to memory. Yeah, it's cool. All right, you're up.
And I'll also just say to you real quick, it's cool that you mentioned that. We as a staff, the summit is coming up soon. And so we went around today and we just prayed through the entire building, and we went through the auditorium, and there weren't enough of us to pray over every seat. But we just talked about the fact that in each of those seats here in Chicago, but we're on 470 locations around the United States. And so auditoriums all around the United States, there's going to be a 22-year-old, a 23-year-old, 34-year-old. The guy's going to do something amazing in their life. He's going to, just like you said that was a transformational part of your life. And Craig Rochelle works with us, and Craig will tell you, he said, I can tell you exactly where I was sitting when I was challenged to lead differently, and Life Church is a result of that. And so we were just praying that God, may there be many, many more of those kind of stories that way. So my favorite story, I don't know that I've got a specific favorite one. I can tell you some that I love. There was an Indian professor from Harvard, and his name was Nashish, and I am drawing blanks on his last name, but he talked about the principle that you can take a superstar in one environment and put him in another environment. He may not be a superstar anymore. And he gave examples of professional sports teams where you'll take a player from one team, put him on the next team, and he doesn't succeed as he did before. And his whole point was the environment is so critical to a person's success. And we do that even in business and in churches, where you hire somebody from another church thinking you've got the superstar and they don't succeed well in your church. And he's just saying it's the environment that's the most important. It's the environment that makes superstars. So that was a big one for me. I love that. I loved when Bill Hybels was teaching, and he just simply said leadership is taking people from here to there. And I can see him drawing that up on the chart and saying, here's where you are, there's where you're trying to go. And so you've got to paint a picture for there and bring people there. So it's just a number of things like that oftentimes it's just one little thing from a summit. That's all I got, but it was massive for me.
Yes. So cool. Yeah, I remember last year, Ryan Leake's talk about chasing failure, and his line of like, I've gotten way further in life chasing failure than chasing success.
Yeah,
it's just a game changer too. So that's what you get at the Global Leadership Summit. If you've never been, church leaders, pastors, like, you need to get to the Global Leadership Summit. If you can't get there live, they've got all the talks available after the fact, I'm sure in many different ways and
60 different languages.
yeah. It's
if I get them translated. So
yeah, very good. Well, David, you've been an advantage to us. We ask all of our guests to challenge our listeners, if they can practically do one thing this week to be a greater disciple of Jesus, what would you challenge them to do?
Well, I'll stick, because I'm with the GLN right now, I'm going to stick with leadership a little bit. And so one of the things that I'll tell pastors, and even when I talk to them about the summit, you can go to some conferences where it's Catalyst, it's what are
Exponential conference. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can go to a lot of different conferences, and they are going to teach broad discipleship measures of how to be a fully devoted follower of Christ, and they're wonderful. They're great things to go to. If you come to the summit, we're not trying to be broad. We're trying to be very, very specific and trying to say, you can learn those other things other places. We're going to teach you specifically about leadership and how to elevate your game as a leader. And it isn't the kind of thing where here are the 10 steps to be a bigger, better leader. It's more through osmosis. It's more through trial and error, but you gain principles and you grow. And, years ago, I was always taught you got to have a pipeline, a leadership pipeline. And I've grown to call it the mythical leadership pipeline, because I've never seen anybody that has one that's successful with it, where somehow you can just turn the spigot and all these leaders come popping out. And instead, what I say is you need to build a leadership culture in your church where you've got a pool of people that are ready to lead. And then when you have a need, you can pull from that pool depending on what your need is. And so the summit not only helps you be a better leader, it helps you have a pool of leaders in your church. Because at LCBC, we had a staff of 300 when I left. And I would say of the 300, 280 of them came from LCBC. We hired them internally. And to us, they were the best staff to have because they knew our DNA. But you've got to have a pool of people available to be able to have that many staff come out of there. And so, focus on leadership and figure out, are you trying to go from a cat to a dog like Chris's church, or what is it you're trying to do, and figure out how to lead your congregation forward? Because I think that's part of discipleship. And I think we're responsible as pastors. You could call it malpractice if you wanted, I guess. If you're not developing that leadership muscle, then you're not being all that God wants you to be. And who knows that God doesn't want your church, Chris, and your leadership team to grow the church to 200 or 400, and if he doesn't, that's okay. Maybe it's perfect where it is. So it's not about size. It's just meeting our full potential.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great.
I love it. All right, leaders, disciples, if you take on that challenge to up your game in leadership, let us know. #RedLetterDisciple. We want to cheer you on. All right, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to end this with David.
Yeah.
You got something prepared for him?
Yeah, of course I
Okay.
do. I have something prepared. David, we've learned a lot today about leadership.
Yeah.
About not being a cat, about being a dog sometimes, about being a dinosaur sometimes. Sometimes you got to be a dinosaur.
Yeah,
Sometimes you got to be a T-Rex. You got to be a raptor. Here's the game that I have for you today, sir. You have given us some juicy nuggets when it comes to leadership, but I want to take more of a practical approach. Sometimes you've no offense, but you've been in the ivory tower for a while, so now I'm sure you never had any issues with employees or pay or anything.
No.
So I'm going to just, from the street cat that I am right now, I'm going to give you some practical leadership situations, and I want you to tell me what you would do in these situations. Okay.
Wow.
All right.
Good. Let's go.
Right. You own a roller skating rink. Okay. You own a roller skating rink. And I got to tell you,
very popular in Pennsylvania.
I got to tell you, things have been really good lately. In fact, tonight you have a packed house. You just opened the door and they're coming in, they're renting. You've got the deodorant spray ready to go, that they spray in the shoes afterwards. All of a sudden, your star DJ who creates this amazing environment, he comes up to you as soon as it opens and demands a pay raise or he's quitting tonight. Now, he's a great DJ and he makes the environment great. I want to know, as a leader and owner of the roller skate rink, what do you do?
And you want a quick answer or a long answer?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you want, man. We can.
I think first I figure out, okay, what am I paying him now? Is he underpaid? If
he's a little underpaid. He's a little
underpaid. I would give him a raise. If I liked him, if I liked his attitude, if he was thinking through for the whole, if he was already overpaid, I'd find somebody else pretty quickly. It's time for you to go to another roller skating rink.
Are you gonna DJ then that night, or what are you gonna?
I had to, yeah.
All right. That one's foolish. Okay, that one was foolish. But let's do a more practical one. You own an ice cream shop. Okay, you own an ice cream shop. It's opening day. It's July in Florida. It's 100 degrees. You are about to open the door for the first time. You spent thousands of dollars in advertising, and one of your employees comes up to you and says, boss, the machines are down. There are 35 people outside your door. It's time to open. What do you do?
So I'm not going to be able to have any ice cream at all, you're saying? Well, first of all, why would you wait till the last minute to make any ice cream? But
I don't know.
That's another issue. I think I'd start going out and handing out coupons and shaking hands and say, come back tomorrow night. We'll give you 2 scoops and do that kind of thing.
That is actually the correct answer.
Wow.
That is good. All right. Now one a little bit more practical. You're the sole pastor of a church of about 65, 75 people. You're about to launch brand new in the fall, your first round of small groups. And someone who's a little bit toxic comes up to you and says, I have to be a leader in this small group. I want to be a leader. What do you do?
So 2 answers I'll give you. That actually happened when we went to LCBC. We were 150 people. I wanted to start small groups. And the argument then, we were a young church. The argument was, what are we going to do with all the kids?
Yeah.
And so my wife and I, we had 9 small groups. And my wife and I took care of the kids for an entire year. We met every other Sunday night. And we would take care of the kids. Now, the cool thing is, after doing that for a year, even now today, there are kids that are, now they're in their 30s, some of them close to 40, that we took care of for that year that we still know. But we tried to, our goal then was to alleviate any problems or obstacles to starting groups. So once we got them launched, then we found other ways to take care of the kids. But I would probably go back to a John Maxwell story that I heard where he would talk about a guy came in, he went to pastor a church. A guy in the church always said that God called him to sing a solo, and he had a terrible, terrible voice. And so John's response to him is, when God tells me that you need to sing, then I'll have you up in front and sing. And it may be the same thing where if, I don't know if you were saying Zach is that toxic guy, but I may need to say to Zach, you know what? You're doing more damage than you're helping, and so probably better.
You are not an advantage, Zach.
Can you please cut that part and save it for me? I'm so good, dude. That was great.
All right,
man. That is actually,
he passed all the tests.
That is actually the correct answer. You get 100%. You're the first person all season to get 100%.
There you go. There you go.
Hey, if I were totally honest with you on your roller skating one, what I probably would have done is gone ahead and let him. I would have suggested let's talk after tonight, and I'd let him play, and then I'd fire him after that night. So I would have gotten through the evening if I were.
There you go.
No, well, I thought that was a strange twist on it, because like if he comes to me, he knows he's got me in this moment. Like I know this is all fictitious, but I was like,
let's talk after.
Let's talk after, buddy.
And back, I know we're out of time, but back on your question about that toxic person, one of our other principles at LCBC, we called it the 90-10 rule. And what I find most pastors do is they try to keep everybody happy. And they don't do it. And nobody's happy. Everybody's frustrated. And you can feel it when you go into a church that they're trying to appease everyone. There's no energy. There's no excitement. And so we've said 90-10 all the time. We'd rather 90% of the people be wildly enthusiastic about us. 10% can be wildly upset with us. We're okay with that.
Yeah.
And so what that let us do, one, we picked a direction. And if people were upset with us, then we're like, man, I'm sorry, but this is the direction we're going. Right. And that 10%, we never hit 10% of the people that were upset. And even as we got bigger, 10% of 22,000 is 2,200.
That's a lot of
so
people.
We would do something and we'd get 20 or 30 emails and we'd all get up in arms going, oh, everybody's upset. And we go, wait a minute. 2230. That's not anywhere close to 2200. We're okay. And so anyway, that just became our mantra is 90-10, and you can't please everyone. And so you can't please that toxic guy. Maybe better to say, you know what, if you're going to be here and you think you need to lead, maybe it's time to move on because you're going to hurt us more than help us. And then you let them go. Yeah. And I think oftentimes pastors are afraid to let people go, and you have to let people go a lot. So
do you, that's some gold right there.
Do you do surveys with your congregation?
Oh, no, not at all. No.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know. Zach used to do those, and I was like, man, I don't know. Yeah. You did. You did surveys all the time.
Well, David didn't. So clearly I did it.
Maybe that's why you didn't get to 24,000. All these surveys you're taking.
There you go. It's the one thing that'll hold you back. David, if people want to connect with you or even the Global Leadership Network, where can they find you these days?
Yeah, it's just globalleadership.org, or for me, it's david.ashcraft@globalleadership.org. You can get me at LCBC as well. And so, happy to talk with anybody and love talking about this kind of stuff. It's fun to just talk and reminisce and dream. So.
His reaction to do you do surveys was probably the most honest. No, he flinched when I asked him about it.
Right, that's good.
Why would I do that?
All right, cool, David. Thanks so much again, man. You're helping a lot of people, and truly honored to have you on the Red Letter Disciple today.
Thank you, Zach. It's fun to be on with you, and it's cool to see what you guys are doing. And enjoyed meeting you last January at the Large Church. Cool. What was that called? The Large Church Conference?
Large Church Network.
Yeah, Large Church Network. It really was a fun group of guys to be with, and felt like there was a lot of stuff that we had in common and camaraderie, and so enjoyed that very much. So thank you, Chris and Zach, for what you guys are doing. Appreciate it.
All right. Appreciate you. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
What an amazing conversation we had with David today. I'm so grateful that he came on to the podcast. When we recorded it, it was literally just a week or two before the Global Leadership Summit. And I can't imagine the just the magnitude of hosting the world's largest leadership conference. Whew. Thank you, David, for the work that you do and for helping us. You were an advantage to so many today. And I really hope that some of you take what he said serious about acting like the church you want to become and even measuring discipleship. Whew. So good. So, hey, if you want to connect with David or anything that he talked about today, we've got those links in our show notes at redletterpodcast.com. That's also where you can link in with our partner today, which is Red Letter Living, and our newest product called Red Letter Advent. Of course, you can go to redletteradvent.com as well, but we would love for your church to get in the pre-sale so that you can launch this product, Advent of 2024. It's going to be ready. The book is done. And so the pre-sale is right now for another week. It's going to end September 17th, 2024. So get in at redletteradvent.com, and we've got a really powerful episode next week. We bring Brenna Blaine onto the podcast, new author of the book, Can I Say That? And here's the subtitle, How Unsafe Questions Leads Us to the Real God. Brenna has an incredible story dealing with so many different things. You're going to hear about it next week, but especially she's become a leading voice in as a person who is same-sex attracted, but wanting to follow the will and the commands of Jesus. She really has a fresh perspective on this and has been searching scriptures to be faithful to God and is unafraid of bringing her hard questions to God. And we're going to talk about how those questions can lead to a richer faith in God. So you will not want to miss. I'm telling you, it's the story. It feels like every season we have one story that just really stands out. Next week is that. So come on back for the Red Letter Disciple next week. And the way you come on back, again, subscribe or follow, and we'll see you back for next week's episode.